All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Eli. I'm the pastor here at Nickel City Church. And man, I'm so glad that you guys are here today. I'll just say everyone in my household is sick. And so it's nice to be around some people who are not sick, firstly. It's nice to spend some time with some non-sick humans. But it is also, I'm glad that you're here and that you aren't sick. Or maybe that you've already gotten over the sickness or kind of moved past that, because it's not been a fun season for the flu and for all the sicknesses going around. But I'm glad you're here, because today we're going to be continuing in our series called Stories Jesus Told. We have 2 more weeks, so this week and one after this. And I've loved this series. This has been a series that we have been exploring the teaching of Jesus. And Jesus oftentimes would use stories, simple stories, to teach big concepts to us. And so we've been exploring some of those stories so that we can understand the big concepts of God. Now, in my life, I have an older brother named Wesley, and Wesley is great. He is older than me, and we're similar in a lot of ways. We both love playing sports. Wesley and I, we both are adventurous. My brother, in fact, he works for the airline, and so he'll travel all the time, or he'll explore different cities, or just kind of go on day trips just because he can. So he's very adventurous. He also loves thrift stores as well as I do. I love going shopping at thrift stores and kind of treasure hunting. So Wesley and I, we're similar in a lot of different ways. But there is one way that Wesley and I are very distinctively different in our lives. And it is this fact that my brother Wesley, he loves leftovers. Anyone in that category that you're like, yeah, I love leftovers? All right, yeah, kind of split. See, for me, it's not so much that I don't like leftovers, but I kind of live by this concept that I wouldn't really go to a restaurant and say, hey, can I have the special from 3 days ago, right? I know it's still good. I know that it is still, edible and it will still be good, but I like things kind of the day that they were prepared. That's just kind of how my mind works. But Wesley's the opposite. He loves leftovers, and that's because Wesley doesn't like to waste food. And that shows up in a lot of different areas in our lives, and this is a way that we kind of are different. I will travel down to Pittsburgh sometimes, which is where my parents and my brother live. And I'll go to my parents' house, and my brother Wesley will come over. And one of the first things that he'll do is he'll open up my parents' fridge, and he'll start digging. And I'm talking about digging deep, like deep into the fridge, moving the orange juice and the milks and getting to the back. And he'll pull out containers of food. And I'll look at him and be like, Wes, I don't know about that. Like, I don't even know when that was made. I don't know how long that's been in there. I don't even know what it is. Like, I'm not sure about this. And he'll be like, no, this is good. This is good. We don't want to waste it. We need to eat this, so he'll dig deep. Another way that I've seen this in his life is he actually came to our house for Thanksgiving. So he traveled up to Buffalo. And as we're kind of cooking together and making the Thanksgiving meal, I'm getting ready to cut the turkey, and I'm starting to cut off the meat. And he's kind of over my shoulder being like, hey, don't miss this part, right? Hey, don't miss it. Make sure you get all of the meat off of there. This is still good. And so he'll kind of be over my shoulder coaching me, making sure that I get every part that is good in there. And then even at Thanksgiving, you're eating your meal and you're kind of starting to wind down a little bit. You've eaten way more than you should. And I'll kind of be winding down, and I'll have a little bit of food left on my plate. And he'll come in and be like, you aren't going to waste that, are you? Right? You're putting that aside. So my brother doesn't like to waste food. And you know what? I think it's a really good quality. I really do. Because I think so many times in our society today, we can be very wasteful. I think there's a lot of things that we waste. When we think about our electronics, we move from one electronic to the next, and then our old phone or old computer just kind of sits off on the sidelines. Maybe we put it into a junk drawer. I mean, the fact that we even have junk drawers, I think says something, that we can be very wasteful, that we don't use things to their potential. And so this is kind of the idea that we're looking at, because Jesus tells us a story that tells us the dangers of wasting the things that God gives to us. And so we're going to explore this idea today in the book of Matthew. But before we jump into this story, I think it's important to know kind of what's happening at this point in Matthew chapter 25. And so Jesus is talking with his disciples. And as he's talking with his disciples, he's explaining to them in this chapter the principles of God, these kingdom principles, the way that God thinks, the things that God values. And so he's explaining these things to his disciples. And in fact, in Matthew 25, Jesus tells them 3 different stories. He gives them 3 different examples. And so if you're here today and you say, you know what, I want to know how God thinks, I want to know these kingdom principles, I would encourage you to read that entire chapter, to read all of Matthew 25, because Jesus explains this to his disciples. Here's the things that God values. But for today, we're going to look right in the middle, right at story number 2, starting in verse 14. And so Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says this, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. Now, I want to pause here just for a moment, just to kind of explain and make sure that we're kind of all on the same thought here. So here we see this master, and he gives them each a bag of silver or some more, 5 bags or 2 bags of silver. And when we think of this, maybe when we read this, we think of a pouch, like a little bag of silver. Because if someone gave that to us today, if someone walked up and handed me a pouch full of silver, I'd be pretty excited, right? That's a great amount of money to us today. But this is actually, there's a little bit more to this because it wasn't just a pouch of silver. In fact, some other translations will explain this and kind of go into depth to give us a little bit more of an accurate measurement. And it's called a talent. In fact, if you know this story, it's oftentimes referred to the parable of the talents. And what a talent was, it wasn't a coin, but it was actually a unit of measure. And it was a unit of measure for weight. And so this is what Jesus is talking about now, talking about a weight measurement. Well, 1 talent, historians believe, was either around 75 pounds or 105 pounds. So you can imagine somewhere in between this amount. So it wasn't a little pouch of silver, but you can imagine a big 75-pound bag of silver that this master is giving. And to some of them, he's giving 5 of them. And not only was it heavy and a lot of silver, but it was actually 1 talent of silver, or 1 bag of silver, was about 20 years worth of labor. So this is a great responsibility. So if you can imagine, he gave 5 bags to the one. He gave basically 100 years of labor, right? Enough money to pay for 100 years of labor. And then to the other guy, about 40 years of labor. And then to the last guy, 20 years worth of silver to pay for labor. And so we can just imagine, right, that it's not some little responsibility, but that this is a big responsibility that the master is leaving and entrusting to his servants. So let's go ahead and keep reading. It says this, the servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I'll give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 2 more. The master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, and so now I give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. Why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even with what little they have, will be taken away. Now, throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. All right, man. Wow, this is a big story, right? And remember, this is teaching us the things that God values, the way that God thinks, these kingdom principles. And Jesus tells this story about using the things that God has entrusted to us. And I think there are so many things that we can learn from this story. I think that we could really pull a lot out of this, but today specifically, I want to focus on 3 observations, 3 things that I think that we can apply into our lives, 3 things that I think will help us to understand how to take these kingdom principles and put them in our lives today. And so let's kind of dive into this. The first observation is this, is that we need to recognize that everything we have is given to us by God. That everything that we have is given to us by God. If we look at the beginning of this story that Jesus is telling, we look at the master and he's giving these bags of silver to these different servants. It's not saying that they earned it or that they worked for it or that this was their pay. In fact, he entrusted them. He gave it to them in abundance. And that's really how it is with our relationship with God. God gives to us in abundance, and everything that we have comes from God. And this is true of our time. The fact that you are here and alive on earth today, that is a gift from God. God has entrusted you and given you time to be on this earth. That's a wonderful gift. Even your talents and the things that you might be good at or might be inclined towards. Those are giftings that God has given you, abilities, the ability to step into and to understand and to do the things that you do well. That you might have a certain bent towards something. Well, that's a gift from God. God has given you an ability or a talent that maybe you've worked on. Even with our finances and our money, God has entrusted and provided for us so much. And maybe you're here today and you say, well, Eli, you know what? I've worked for my money. I've put a lot of work in and hours in at work. Isn't that me working for my money? Well, yes, that is true. In fact, the Bible does say that if you don't work, that you don't eat. And so there's a principle that as you work, that is a way that God has designed for you to be provided for. But even the fact that you have a job, even the fact that you have the ability to learn new things and have a job and be able to serve others, that's a gift from God. And so as we look at everything that we have in our lives, we can point it back to God, who is our ultimate provider. And so this is the first idea, that we look and see that everything that we have is given to us by God. But it's not just given to us by God, it's given to us by God for a purpose. In fact, as we look at, I want to go back to one of those verses, because as we look at the verse, we see the response of the servant who had been faithful with what God has given him. Look at what he said. He said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 5 more. I love this first part because he says, you gave, right? He doesn't say, hey, I earned this, or hey, I deserved this, or hey, I've worked for this. He says, I understand, Master, that you gave me these 5 bags of silver. But then he goes on and he says, the purpose. He says, you gave me these bags to invest. not just to hold on to, not just to have in my life, not just for my own pleasure or my own enjoyment, not just to keep safe, but you gave them to me for a purpose, and it is to invest. Man, it's the same in our lives, that everything that God gives us, he gives to us with a purpose. The time that you have here on earth, it's given to you not just for your own pleasure or your own desires, but it's given to you with a designated purpose. And it's given to you with a purpose to invest in the lives of others, to invest in the kingdom principles of God, to invest in the church, to invest and help other people to understand God in a real way. God has given you time, and the time he has given you is with a purpose so that we can invest it and turn it around and give it to others, so that we can invest in the things that are important to God. It's the same with our money that God has given us and provided for us in so many different ways in our money. Why? With a purpose, yes, that we're taken care of, but that's not the end of it. He provides for us and gives us an abundance so that we can invest in the lives of other people, so we can invest in things that help the kingdom of God to keep going. So that means in the church, that means overseas in missions, it means giving to people who are in need. This is the idea that God entrusts us with resources with a purpose so that we can invest them in the lives of others and in the things that are important to God. And it's the same of our talents. The things that you are naturally good at, the things that you might have a bent towards, the thing that you have maybe an ability or a skill that you've picked up on. God has given you a skill and ability, not just for your own entertainment or enjoyment, not just for you to hold on to, but he's given it to you with a purpose, to invest in the lives of the people around you, to use your talents to invest in these kingdom principles. Everything that God has, everything that he gives to us is given to us with this purpose, to invest it in others and in the kingdom of God. And so this is the first observation for us, is that everything that we have, we should think about in this perspective. We should look at everything that we own, not as something that we've earned or deserved, but something given to us by God with a very specific purpose, and that purpose to invest. Now, the second observation is this, is that not everyone, if we look back in the story, that not everyone was given the same amount. And that's okay. If we look back in the story, we remember that the first servant got 5 bags of silver, the second one got 2 bags of silver, and the other one got 1 bag of silver, and it said that it was given to them according to their ability to handle it, right? According to their potential to handle this. And so this is something we see Jesus talking about. And so maybe in your life today, you feel like God has given you a lot. Maybe you're here today and you say, well, I feel like God has given me kind of the 5 bags of silver. I feel like he's entrusted a lot to me. Maybe it's in kind of your community. Maybe God has given you a high capacity. Maybe people around you kind of naturally follow you and you have an influence. Maybe God has given you a lot of things and a lot of influence and a lot of leadership ability. Well, that's good. That's okay. That's a really great thing. Maybe he's given you the 5 bags of silver. Maybe it's even in your finances or in your resources. Maybe God has given you an abundance and you feel like, man, God's blessed me a lot. He's given me kind of this 5 bags of silver worth. And guess what? That's okay too. That's really good. Maybe you're sitting here today and you say, well, Eli, I don't feel like that's me though. I feel like I don't have 5 bags full. I feel like I'm more kind of like this guy who has 1 bag. I look at other people and I kind of wish that I had the things that they had, but I don't feel like I have a lot of leadership ability. I don't feel like I have a lot of influence. I don't feel like I have a whole lot to offer right now. My money situation is tight and it's difficult for me. I don't feel like I have a whole lot that I can give. I don't feel like I have a whole lot in my life. Well, guess what? That's okay too. That's okay. If we remember back to this, it's not this idea that the person with 5 bags was rewarded the most. It was that he was faithful to the things he had. In fact, the person who had 2 bags, the master said the same thing to him. Well done. Good job. Let's celebrate. So it doesn't matter to what capacity God has given you right now in this moment. Maybe you're at 5 bags, maybe you're at 2 bags, maybe you feel like you're kind of stuck and you feel like you're in 1 bag. Well, it doesn't matter as long as you're faithful to the things that God has given you. It doesn't matter how much you have, it matters what you do with it. I think a lot of times we can get stuck here. Sometimes we look and we compare ourselves to others. There's a lot of times that we look at other people who might have more than us or who might have a higher capacity than us, and we start to compare and we start to wonder and we start to try to be like them rather than being faithful to what God has given to us. And when we do that, we can actually miss out on being faithful to God. Kind of an example of this, I have friends who are also pastors, and I talk to different people, and sometimes I look at the things that they do, and they're pastoring a church of and speaking to 10,000 people, and they're having hundreds of volunteers get together to do things, and I look at them and I go, man, that's awesome. Like, that would be kind of cool, right? To be able to step into a role like that and have that big of a capacity and that big of an influence. That's kind of a cool thing. But what happens is when we focus on other people, when we focus on the other people who might have a higher capacity or who God has entrusted more to, we start to actually stop focusing on the things that God has entrusted us to. We start to not be faithful because we stop doing and we start just kind of dreaming of what could be. And so it's important for us today to not worry about what God has given others, but to ask the question, what has God given me? And how can I be faithful to it? And guess what? When you're faithful to what God has given you, remember Jesus says this in the story, that when you're faithful, that more will be given to you. That if you want to grow your capacity, if you want to one day be a higher level of influence, it starts by being faithful to the things God has given you right now in this moment. Those are the first 2 ideas. The first observation is that everything that we have comes from God. Everything that we have in our lives is given to us by God, and it's given to us with a purpose to invest. The second observation is that not everyone is given the same amount, and that's okay. We need to be faithful to what God has given us in this moment. And as we are faithful in the moment, God will continue to add on top of that. And that moves us into observation number 3. And I think that up until this point, anytime I talk with people about this, up until this point, everyone is kind of on board. They're all like, yes, we agree with this. We can understand this. We believe this. That they say, you know what? We believe that God provides for us. And yes, we need to be responsible. Yes, we understand that God gifts us all differently or gives us different abundance or different amount. But here's where we can sometimes start to lose it, or sometimes where it becomes difficult for us to put this into action in our lives. And the third observation is this, is that faithfulness requires work. Faithfulness requires work. If you remember with the 2 faithful servants, they didn't just sit around and take the bags of silver and just wait and magically it doubled, right? That's not what happened in the story. It says in the Bible that they put the money to work. They took what was given to them and then they started to put in work. And if you remember, this was over time. The master was gone, it said, for a long time. So it wasn't that they just invested it and just took the easy route and put it in a bank and said, well, we'll just see what happens. They worked this every day. They started working, and I'm sure they didn't see the results right away. They put in the work to be faithful, and as they were faithful, they saw their abundance start to grow. Well, this is the same in our lives, and I think this is where it gets difficult, because I feel like for Christians sometimes we like the idea of being faithful to God. We like the idea of being faithful, but a lot of times we don't like the fact that it actually requires work. that it requires sacrifice on our part. We would agree, would say, yes, we need to be faithful with the things that God gives us. We don't want to waste the things God gives us. We would agree with all of that, but as soon as we say it requires sacrifice, some of us kind of take a step back. A lot of times we like to give God our leftovers. We like to give him the things that are easy or convenient. When we give God our time, maybe it's time that we have left in our schedule, or we serve, or we give of our time when it's convenient for us. When we give of our money, maybe we give when we feel compelled or moved in our feelings or our emotions. But we don't really give because it's sacrificial or because that's what God desires. We give when it's kind of moving for us. I think we do the same thing in our talents. That there's sometimes that we say, well, yeah, I'm going to give of my talents. I'm going to be faithful with the talents that I have. And we do it, but only when there's kind of something in it for us. And maybe it's even fulfillment. Maybe it's that you feel good when you do it. And you say, well, I feel good. I've had so many people say, well, I really love serving at the church. And, I really love the kids. But I just don't feel like it really fulfills me being back there. Or I love, being a greeter, but I just don't really feel like it, does a lot for me. Well, listen, when we give of our talents and our abilities, it's not for us. It's not because we're getting something in return, and that includes fulfillment. We give and we put it to work because we're being faithful to what God has entrusted us with. Faithfulness requires work, and sometimes it's difficult. But remember, everything that we have is given to us by God. Everything that we have is given to us by God with a purpose. And so as we look at our lives, as we look at our time, I would encourage us not to just give God our leftover time, but to carve out time. To intentionally schedule time to say, God, I want to give you time. I want to give of myself. Give of myself where it's difficult and it requires sacrifice at times. But God, I want to be faithful to the time you've given me. I don't just want to serve or give when it's easy. I want to give of myself in a way that is pleasing to you. It's the same with our talents. Maybe there's things that you're good at. Maybe there's giftings God has given you. Rather than looking to use your giftings just when it's easy or when it's convenient or when you'll get something in return, look to say, God, I want to be faithful to the things you've given me. God, if you've given me a bold personality, I want to use it in the way that you designed. God, if you've given me a high capacity, I want to use that in the way that you designed. In my life, I've seen this happen kind of on both ends. I've seen some people who are loving God, but they refuse to give of their talent. They refuse to give of the things that are good, that they do well. And as I watched that, I kind of made it a decision. I said, God, I don't want that ever to be my motivation. God, I want to give of my talent. You created me, you designed me for a reason, and I want to give my best self to you. I want to be faithful to the way that you've designed me. And it's hard. Let me tell you, it's difficult sometimes. But I feel like for some of us today, that will be the biggest sacrifice, to say, I'm not looking to get something in return. I'm not looking to trade something. I'm looking to give of myself, because this is what faithfulness looks like. It requires work. And then even in our finances, it's the same way. Not just giving when we feel compelled or moved, but saying, God, I recognize that you've entrusted me with a lot, and I want to be faithful to you. I'm not just talking about giving in church. I mean, that is part of the kingdom of God, but I'm talking about being faithful with your finances throughout the week, living a generous life, being kind, not spending just on things that you desire, but using your money the way God designed for you. Everything that we have is given to us by God, and it's important that we recognize it. And we recognize that it's not always easy, but that it requires work. And that's what brings this reward, this sacrifice, as we live our lives this way. So here's the question that I have today as we close is, what has God given you? What has God entrusted to you? Maybe just now, just start to ask yourself that question. Maybe even talk to God as we pray. Just say, God, I want to know what you've given me, because I want to use it the way you've designed it. I don't just want to live on my own. I don't just want to use it for my own gain or my own benefit. God, I want to be faithful to the things that you gave to me so that I can help to invest in these kingdom principles that you have. See, this story, it matters to God. This is the big concept, but Jesus thought it was so important that he broke it down in this story. Now, maybe today you're sitting here and you say, you know what, I feel like I'm struggling. I feel like I'm kind of in that one bag category right now of my life. I feel like I ask myself, well, what could I give? I don't really know. I don't feel like I'm kind of equipped with leadership. I don't feel like I have a whole lot of influence over others. I don't feel like I have a lot of money. Like, what can I possibly do in this moment? Let me encourage you that God doesn't care how much you have. He cares about your faithfulness to it. And so even if you only have one thing, if there's one thing God has gifted you with, I'd encourage you to dive into it. Maybe that thing is encouraging others. Maybe it's being an encouragement to those around you. Listen, don't just do it when it's convenient or easy, but put work into encouraging others. Look for opportunities to encourage others. Maybe as you're at the grocery store and you see someone mopping up a floor, go out of your way to say, hey, I notice you. I think you're doing a great job. Be faithful to the things God has given to you. Don't worry about anyone else. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Be faithful to what God has entrusted you with. And I believe that at the end of it, you'll hear those same words. Good job. Man, good work. Let's celebrate. Let's party. Now, maybe you're here today, and I believe that there are some people here who are some of those 5-bag, high-capacity people. God has entrusted you with a lot. God has given you a high capacity. He's given you a big influence. He's given you the ability to lead others or the ability to think critically. I believe there's people here today who God has entrusted with big things. And listen, this is sometimes where it gets the most difficult, and I want to talk to those people. Maybe you're here today and you say, I know that's me. Everyone around me kind of recognizes that. My boss, my coworkers, they recognize this. Let me speak to you for a moment. It can be so difficult sometimes for these 5-bag people, because you can sometimes get away with giving the minimum. Sometimes when you give the minimum effort, the people around you are still impressed. Sometimes you can give the minimum effort and things still work out around you and projects come together. And other people look at you and say, man, good job. But listen, we aren't working for the approval of others. We aren't looking to impress others. You're looking to be faithful to God. So if you are that person who's at a high capacity, a level 5 bag capacity of a person, listen, don't get stuck in the trap of just giving the minimum. Be faithful to what God has given you by giving to your full capacity, giving of your full potential. Because we're working for God, not for the people around us. I believe, especially with some of you who are here today who say, man, I struggle with that, but I want to start. I believe that as we step into this, say, God, I want to be faithful to the things around me, whether it's small with encouragement or whether it's big. I believe that God is going to do big things in this church. I believe as we step in and start becoming faithful to what God has entrusted us, to not waste the things He's given us, I believe that we'll see a difference in our city. I believe we'll see a difference even globally around the world. I truly believe that if we start being faithful to what God entrusts to us, that we would see great things. We'd see these kingdom principles start to come alive in our lives, and in the lives of the people all around us. So I want to encourage you today to be faithful, to put in the work, to accept where you are, and to be faithful to the things in front of you, because ultimately it's given to you by God with a purpose. Let's not let it go to waste. So here's what I want to do. I want to close it out today, and I don't want us to respond publicly. I just want us to take a personal moment, because I feel like there's some of us here in this room today who are maybe starting to understand this for the first time, who maybe are starting to understand that God values you, that God has created you, that God has designed you, that God has a purpose and a plan for your life. And so let's take a moment just now, just to pray. And I want to start off just maybe with a moment that you start to ask yourself this question: what ways has God gifted you? Just ask yourself that question. In what ways has God gifted me? And if you don't know, if you're here and you say, I'm not sure what that is, let me encourage you right now in this moment to ask Him. Say, God, what have you gifted me in? God, I don't want to try to be someone I'm not. I don't want to try to step into something that I'm not supposed to do. God, what are the ways that you've gifted me, and how can I be the best version of that? How can I be faithful to the things that you've entrusted me with? How can I not waste the things that you've given me? And as we're faithful with the things He's given us now, He'll keep growing us and entrusting us with more. And so it's important that we pay attention to the things God continues to pour out on us. And so let's just pray together as we close. God, we thank you that your ways are higher than our ways. God, we thank you that you do have kingdom principles and that you desire us to know them. Not just to know about them, but to understand them in a real way. God, we thank you for these stories that you tell and these parables. God, I pray for those who are here today, God, and for those watching, that they would really start to step into the calling and purpose that you have for their lives. God, that they would start to understand the things you've entrusted them with. God, that they would be faithful to the things that you've given them. That they would start to step in and recognize that there's a reason you've gifted them. There's a reason that you've given them the personality. There's a reason that you've given them the capacity. There's a reason that you've given them the heart or the compassion that you've given them. God, I pray that they would recognize right now in this moment that you have a design and a purpose for their life. God, we want to be a church that doesn't waste. We don't want to waste the good things that you have in store for us. God, we don't want to waste the impact that we can have on the people around us. God, we want to see and step into a new calling, a new understanding of your desires for our lives. God, so change our heart, change our perspectives. Break down the things in our lives that we've believed for so long. God, let us start to step into the way that you view us. God, and let us be faithful to you. God, let us do the things to our fullest ability. Let us put in the work that is required. God, not just to sit around and wait for opportunities, but to actively seek out ways to use our giftings. Look out for ways to carve out time, to make time for you and for those around us. God, look for ways that we can partner with you with our finances and with the things that we own. God, we want to be faithful to you in every way. We don't want to hold anything back from you, God, because you truly are worthy. Everything that we have is given by you. God, help us not to forget that, and help us to identify the purpose that you give it to us for, God. God, we're so grateful, and we thank you, and we love you so much. We say all of these things in Jesus' name. We say amen. Amen. Guys, I've really loved this series. We have one more week of it. I'm excited to dive into it. One more week in this series. I've really enjoyed looking at the teachings of Jesus. And man, when we apply these principles to our lives, things change. I really believe that. And so I want to encourage you to if you've missed a week, to get caught up, to watch these back and start to apply these things to our lives, not just to know it, but to really step into these things. I also want to invite you back this Wednesday. It's our last week of the What is Love Connect group. It's not too late to join. It's really a great time. We've had a first great 2 weeks. We'd love to see you there. It's not too late. We've had such fun and laughs and a really good time as we've explored what it means to love the people around us and to love God. And so there's one more week of that. And hope you guys stay away from the sickness. I hope that you all keep fighting it off, and we hope to see you Wednesday and next week as we wrap this series up. We love you guys, and we'll see you later. Thanks.